The Boston Celtics and Phoenix Suns blew some pretty significant leads in their games 2 days ago, and I really think that this is indicative of some of the biggest problems that face both of these at least supposed contenders. Hello everybody, welcome to Oscar Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference in how this video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you did not check out our most recent podcast going over our top 50 players in the NBA, that pod is now available and it will be linked, top link in the description and pinned comment. So go check that out if you didn't manage to tune in for the stream. For those of you that did, we appreciate you. Well, with that said, today I actually am re-recording this video because I'm covering the Celtics versus Cavs game and the Suns versus Nuggets game. Unfortunately, the recording that I did was too blurry and the audio was glitchy, so we just had to scrap it. So doing this again, we're also going to be talking about Karl-Anthony Towns and Ben Simmons and the injuries that they have sustained and what it means for them, their careers, and their teams. First things first, we're going to talk about the Phoenix Suns versus Denver Nuggets game, where Phoenix ended up prevailing in spite of the fact that they blew a rather significant lead to the Nuggets. I don't remember what exactly the lead was at its highest point. I believe it got to around 20, and Denver managed to mount the comeback in the fourth quarter, primarily because of a major issue that exists for this team, which is that they suck in the fourth quarter. They are one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the league at fourth quarter offense, which is pretty surprising given what this roster is and the players that exist on it. I should mention that there was no Devin Booker in this game, so that's obviously playing a pretty significant factor in why this went the way it did. But even with Devin Booker, for this entire season, they have been terrible at fourth quarter offense. On the season, they're averaging about 24 points per game in the fourth, which is pretty low. Their efficiency is also rough. They shoot like 32% from three in that quarter. Just not good across the board. On Denver's side of things, it was actually a very bad Nikola Jokic game. I mean, 25 points, 16 rebounds, and 5 assists does not look too bad. However, for Jokic, he was under 50% from the field, which for him is pretty bad. Normally he's almost always above 50%. Then he also had 7 turnovers, and what was weird is like it was specifically his processing of the game that was a huge problem, because more often than not when Nikola Jokic is making a decision, he's making the right one. But in this game, he so consistently made bad decisions, and it wasn't even really because of Phoenix's defense. I mean, credit to them, they played well enough. He was just making a lot of boneheaded decisions. He also struggled from the field. He did hit his threes, went 4 for 7 from outside, which I feel like 4 threes is a very high amount for Jokic. Doesn't really take them that often. Another bad game that affected Denver was Aaron Gordon, who went 3 for 10 and had the team worst negative 22 plus minus. That's not good. Luckily for Denver, I mean, they ultimately lost the game in overtime, spoiler alert, but Jamal Murray was really good for them, really clutch in this game, got a near triple-double, just 7 rebounds, so not quite near, but you know what I mean. Yeah, a bunch of clutch shots in the fourth quarter, got the team to overtime, but immediately Phoenix just absolutely whooped their ass in overtime, which is weird because they got that big lead in the third quarter, then they disappeared in the fourth quarter, and then they went right back to the dominance that they previously established in that third quarter. And that's for why I think this happens for Phoenix, why they have this problem. I mentioned the star power that they have and what that can mean for a fourth quarter offense. I almost feel like it's a bit too much, not just in the volume of the type of players you have that do that shit with Durant, Booker, and Beal, but also in that they just kind of default to superstar offense, to isolation offense, to hero ball, and that type of play style has its place in the NBA. Even today, it's not as prevalent today as it used to be, but that type of approach to scoring has its place, especially in a fourth quarter setting. However, not exclusively, and not throughout pretty much from like the 8-minute mark onward, acting like every possession just we have to have a superstar player shooting the ball, because really that approach, it doesn't result in a lot of high-octane offense. Like, for example, in this game, Grayson Allen was huge. Grayson Allen hit 8 3-pointers out of his 12 attempts, had 28 points. However, he did all of that with 10 minutes to go in the third quarter. By the time that from that stretch on forward, Grayson Allen was non-factor, especially in the fourth quarter. And part of that was just that the shots that they were getting was not really friendly to role players. It's just like they're either out of rhythm when they're getting the shots or they're not getting the shots, period. Another interesting thing about this game that I will highlight from Phoenix is that they've had kind of a playmaking by committee approach. And I just want to point out that Yusuf Nurkic got 6 assists, Royce O'Neal got 6 assists, Bradley Beal got 6 assists, Kevin Durant got 5 assists, and Grayson Allen got 4. That's pretty interesting. A lot of playmaking across the board from there. But yeah, that issue, the fourth quarter offense, it's really going to hold Phoenix back. They're already a team that I'm kind of not a big fan of and not really a big believer in terms of their ability to be a contender. You know, I said in the intro that these teams were supposed contenders when talking about Boston and Phoenix, but really supposed was for Phoenix. We all know that Boston's a contender. Phoenix just doesn't quite have it. I do like their rotation a lot more, especially after the Royce O'Neal trade. It just looks like an actual rotation and not we're pretending these guys are better than they are. Still not as much bench depth as you would like, but at the very least, very good starting lineup. And I do think that the team will be really competitive. Contender threshold, I would like them to be better in the fourth quarter for me to say that. I'd like them to be a little bit better defensively for me to say that. And then I like the playmaking by committee thing, but also having no high-level playmaker is a thing that concerns me. Something that's also always concerned me about the Boston Celtics. I guess I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Celtics versus Cavs game, where admittingly, there's less criticism to throw around because while there were definitely things that were Boston's fault for why this game went the way that it did, it wasn't as though there were not some factors that were a little ridiculous, mainly being Dean Wade having a 20-point fourth quarter where he hit like 4 3-pointers and got a putback dunk for the game. I think he had another putback dunk that sparked the whole thing. And with him doing this, and this just happening with Max Strus recently with the against the Dallas Mavericks where he hit the 4 3-pointers and then the half-court game winner, that type of thing. I mean, these white boys in Cleveland are dangerous. I don't know how they keep getting away with these wins under these weird-ass circumstances, but it seemed to work. What's funny about this is that they just played the New York Knicks, who were without Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle. Jalen got injured in the first minute of action. They managed to lose that game, but they managed to make a huge comeback against the Boston Celtics and ultimately win, again, against the Boston Celtics, but they couldn't beat the fucking Knicks. Basketball is weird, is the point that I am getting at, because sometimes Dean Wade, of all people, just goes the fuck off. Now, I do want to point out that I have historically been complimentary towards Dean Wade, yet pretty much whenever I talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers, at least half of the time, because he's like a big forward. He's like 6'9", plays good defense, and he hits his threes. He's on 40% from 3 on this season. He went 6 for 9 from 3 in this game as a whole. And I've argued before that he might be the forward for this team. It actually is definitely Isaac Okoro. So shout out to him for actually working his game out, because he had a really slow start to his career where it looked like he might end up being like an Andre Roberson type. But this year he's up to 40% from 3. He went 4 for 8 in this game, finished with 16 points. Great defense and good three-point shooting. That's exactly what you want out of your fifth guy. He's perfect for that. As much of an anomaly as that fourth quarter from Dean Wade was, there were also things that were Boston's fault, and that's kind of the thing that concerns me about them, is historically they kind of always find ways to blow leads. And they've had their reasons for that. A lot of it has been stagnation in the fourth quarter offensively, ironically very similar to Phoenix. A lot of it has been that lack of high-level playmaking, again, kind of similar to Phoenix. I didn't even really realize how many significant parallels there were here until I'm saying it out loud. But yeah, that is a big factor. But also, Jason Tatum is not a very good superstar in the clutch. I was looking, I saw a post about it on Twitter of his field goal percentage in the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter, and it's like 34% or something like that. Just not good. That's really, really rough. And given how often the Celtics and Jason Tatum default to hero ball, not making those shots, shooting such a low percentage on them, you're naturally just going to have leads disappear if you're going to go for that low quality of offense as your staple in that environment. Other than that, this was A pretty standard game from the Celtics. I didn't even mention, continuing the criticism of Jason Tatum, he was 1 for 10 in the second half of this game, somewhere around that. He had 20 points in the first half, which is great. Hit a buzzer-beating step-back 3 at the end of the first quarter. Was really hot early, and a bunch of people on Twitter started talking shit, like on the Tatum camp. And then he went 1 for 10 in the second half. Attempted game winner, or at least a really, really clutch shot late. Ended up kicking his leg out, and it was ruled a non-foul, and Cleveland got the ball and got that tip from Dean Wade for the game. A little bit of a collapse for Boston, and they have this history of collapsing, and even with this new personnel, I just don't know how concerned I should be about it, but I definitely am concerned. I'll say that much. Also, there was no Donovan Mitchell for the Cavs. That's a pretty key element. Darius Garland had to take on a little bit more responsibility. He shot pretty terribly from the field, going 6 for 20, but he did get 11 assists and was the main orchestrator of their offense, so, credit to him for that. But we're going to move on now to Karl Anthony Towns and him unfortunately being out indefinitely and what that means for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Timberwolves have been one of the better teams in the NBA this year, one of the top seeds in the Western Conference, in a very, very bloody Western Conference, might I add. Initially, towards the start of the season, we released a video that was pretty critical of KAT and suggesting that they should probably trade him to truly unlock being into a real contending team. And since then, KAT has had a great season, and he ended up being an all-star, which I definitely would not have predicted. And he is a huge part of a Minnesota offense that overall is not great. That's what really concerns me for Minnesota and their potential contention here, is that they were already not an amazing offensive team, especially for a team in the contender class. They would be a B-tier contender for me rather than an A-tier contender, but they are indeed contenders, no doubt. Losing such a significant force for your offense when you're not a good offense to begin with, not ideal. The Timberwolves have hung their hat on defense this year, and that has been the reason for their success. And then they've just kind of skated by on offense, and they've done that through the star power of Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns. But if you don't have half of that equation, then it becomes Anthony Edwards' responsibility to pretty much do all of the stuff on offense, because there's no, really offensively minded players left on the team after that, other than really Naz Reid and I guess a little bit of Mike Conley. I suppose you can ask Mike Conley to do a little bit more creation. He's become more and more of a spot-up guy as his career has gone along, which is a natural thing to do as you get older. 2 out of 3 of the shots that he's taking now are going to be three-pointers. That's mostly what his job has been, but perhaps you can call upon him to do a little bit more creation. Naz Reid is probably the guy who's going to take the starting spot from KAT now that he's out, and Naz Reid can do a lot of similar things to Karl Anthony Towns, even if he does a perfect replication of KAT, even if he was just as good, shot the 3-ball just as well, was an offensive threat just as much, and probably a better defender on top of that. Even if all that happened, well, you're still losing the dynamic of having Naz fucking Reid coming off of your bench, and instead it's just going to be somebody else who's not Naz Reid and not the best backup center in all of basketball. It would probably be better than it would be otherwise if Naz could just fully replicate what KAT is doing, but even then you're losing depth in the process. So one way or the other, you're taking an L there. I do feel pretty decent about Naz's chance of actually doing exactly that. I don't think he can be as good of a shooter as KAT, but in terms of just scoring 20 points or so, statistically speaking, I imagine per 100 their points per game is actually not that different. But there's also the factor of how KAT stretches the floor. Naz is not going to do it quite to that level. It's just not ideal, and if they don't get him back before the playoffs, which is looking like it won't happen, that's probably going to be enough for me to knock them out of a contender conversation. But, we can wait and see a little bit of what this team looks like with Naz Reid in that starting lineup, again, presuming that that's what they go with, but it's not ideal. That's for damn sure. Last but not least, but also kind of, I want to talk about Ben Simmons and the injury that he sustained. Ben Simmons historically has dealt with a lot of injury stuff, and this is really no different, especially in that it's pretty much the same area that is always affecting him, which is stuff with his back and stuff with his nerves. He's out for the rest of the season. This is really not all that significant in terms of the landscape of the NBA. The Nets are a very non-factor NBA team right now that no one really cares about, and Ben Simmons wasn't even a significant contributor to them, although he was one of the better players. I really just want to highlight this because Ben Simmons is someone who I think has been very unfairly hated on and criticized throughout his career. I think there are definitely reasonable things to give him crap for, but I think the injury stuff with him is very real. I don't like how not seriously at all people treated the mental health stuff when that happened. Made a whole deep dive about it back in the day. So I just want to highlight this, that like a lot of the reason for the Ben Simmons fall off is that he's had crazy back injury stuff. That's it. Shout out to Nick for editing this video, and goodbye.